Okay. Thank you all for coming to the April meeting of the Community Reinvestment Advisory Committee of Cuyahoga County Council. My name is Cheryl Stevens and I chair this committee. If you would call the roll, Madam Clerk.
Ms. Stevens?
Yes. Could you hear me?
Mr. Jones? Yes, I heard you. Mr. Jones?
Okay.
Mr. Jones is absent at the moment. Ms. Blackwell?
Here.
Ms. Wego? Ms. Wego is absent at the moment. Mr. McDermott?
Are you doing okay with your rental assistance money, man? Do you happen to, Michelle, do you happen to know?
Mr. McDermott?
Yeah, I mean, we got a couple processes to distribute it. We had kind of one local agency really do a lot of it.
Hey, Michelle Pomerantz, your phone needs to be muted.
Okay, Mr. McDermott? Is absent at the moment. Ms. Anderson?
Here.
Mr. Jones?
Present.
Mr. Benjamin?
Here.
Mr. Sharon? Sharon is absent at the moment. We have a quorum. Also like the record to reflect that Ms. Dottie Martin is attending for Mayor Velo today.
Thank you. Our agenda is simple as usual. This time, for the first piece of the meeting, I want to focus on our mission statement activity. Sally's going to lead that portion of the dialogue in that we put together a committee last month, and they got their work done in, I think, 48 hours. It wasn't a television show, guys, but it was tremendous that we had similar thoughts about what we want the direction of this committee to be. So, Sally, if you'd start out by reading the subcommittee's recommendations for a mission statement, and then we could have our discussion.
I'd like, if you don't mind, I'd like to ask if Frank Ford could screen share that document with us. I'm sorry, I'm putting him on the spot, but I can't screen share on this weird device, and I should have thought of that. But
and actually don't have it set up, but if you give me a moment, I'm sure I'll get to it.
Chairwoman Stevens, this is Ashley. Can you hear me?
I'm sorry, yeah. Ashley, what did you say?
We need to do, there was no public comment, but also approve the minutes from the last meeting.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was so eager to get to the business of the committee, today's business of the committee. Has the committee reviewed the minutes of the last meeting?
We have received them.
If you've received them and have reviewed them and there are no changes, could I have a recommendation for approval?
I will recommend approval.
Thank you, Ms. Anderson. Yes. Is there a second?
Second.
Whose voice did I hear for the second?
Benjamin.
Thank you, Mr. Benjamin. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Any opposed? Thank you. The minutes are approved.
Madam Chair, if it's okay, I screen shared the document that Sally was referring to, so it's up on the screen.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Matt. I really appreciate it. This device has some limitations. The mission statement that our committee developed as follows. The mission of the subcommittee is to serve in an advisory capacity to the Community Development Committee by making recommendations and providing oversight to improve the reinvestment performance of financial institutions doing business in Cuyahoga County with respect to achieving the following: increased access to home purchase and home improvement loans in underserved communities, i.e. people of color and low and middle income neighborhoods, increased investment in underserved communities in order to increase the value of homes, increased investment in underserved communities in order to improve the quality of rental properties in those communities. An initial focus of the advisory subcommittee shall be the KeyBank Banking and Treasury Services contract with Cuyahoga County and the KeyBank Community Commitments for Cuyahoga County. The advisory subcommittee may expand its focus as it deems appropriate to other financial institutions and mortgage lenders and to issues that impact fair and equitable access to credit, homeownership, and banking services. The initial duration of the advisory subcommittee shall be the term of the Key Bank banking and treasury services contract or until otherwise determined by County Council's Community Development Committee. So the genesis of this in the committee's work was to try to encompass the full range of what this group should be focusing on, in our opinion. And I know that originally this constituted around the Key Bank Banking Services Agreement, and that still should be a major focus, but more globally, to take a deep dive in making sure that all of our community is being served with respect to access to credit. So we feel like this document does capture that in the spirit of what we believe this committee is tasked to do.
Okay. Other comments by other committee members? Wow.
I think our comments are probably best seen in the mission statement itself.
Okay.
That we did have direct input and contributed to the formation of this.
Okay.
There was a significant amount of back and forth. And of course, this is what we've landed on to try to keep it as concise as possible while also encompassing all of the aspects that we think we need to be keeping our sights on. We would certainly welcome hearing from the rest of the group as to whether or not you think that we've hit the mark on this.
All right. So now we're open to comments from everyone, whether you
Madam Chairwoman,
focused on the committee or not, and that includes any comments from staff as well.
This is Khalil.
Hi, Khalil.
Hi. Good afternoon. I did want to say just my initial thoughts on this are that it certainly tracks very well with the initial design of the advisory subcommittee upon its creation. I think the addition of the potential for investigating other banks' practices and with an eye toward, I think as you mentioned when we were first starting this, an eye toward what comes next, the next sort of contract and you know, how we're going to do business going forward. And so not just restricted to Key Bank in this particular contract, but what happens next is that was envisioned in the original design of the subcommittee. I do want to point out though that according to council rules, the duration is specific to the creation of, you know, that creating document that was created, I think, initially by former President Brady and the then chair of the Community Development Committee, Jones.
So my recommendations will evolve around that last sentence. It will need to be expanded so that we can say any expansion of mission or duration of time of the advisory subcommittee will be determined by County Council's Community Development Committee or something to that effect, because we are empowered through the Community Development Committee. And Council President will be joining us. He has texted me that he had a couple of things that he had to finish up, but he will be able to participate before we're finished today. But I can't, those were my only comments, that we have to defer to the CD committee of council and the council president because the previous president enabled us. Any other thoughts?
Madam Chair, if it's appropriate, if hearing no comment, I would move that we adopt this with accommodations because, as Sally said, there is extraordinary work by many people who contributed to it. I want to give a special shout out to Gary Benjamin, who wrote the first draft, and then to Frank Ford, who did revisions, and then Barbara Anderson, who did a lot of work on this, but really a lot of appreciation and thanks to Sally Martin, who was our fearless leader and captain to get us to this point. So I would move for approval with accommodation.
And
So
I
you'll
will
give,
second.
thank you. Moment of discussion here.
Oh, that's-
If that accommodation is to allow staff to create the right language for the last sentence, is that what you mean?
Yes, Madam Chairman, no objection to that.
Okay, then that's what we'll let staff play with the wording of that, and I think we should be good. This is moving so quickly. I'm like thrilled because we all know that some committees labor for meetings over what they think their mission is. I want to thank you all for making that so easy. As you know, I have believed, and I think most of you concur, that part of one of the reasons that we have problems with the ability to get families into home ownership and to borrow long-term mortgages that will allow them to rehab or do improvements on the properties, or to see continuous investment in neighborhoods that is not focused on robbing people of that piece of the American dream, which means that we believe we can all own a home if we manage our credit correctly. And that communities can invest in neighborhood after neighborhood and see values in neighborhoods increase and encourage more people to buy home ownership in core cities and in maturing inner ring suburbs like the ones most of us live in. And so one of the things that I've been focused on is why appraisals, especially residential appraisals, keep becoming problems for home ownership, for increased values in properties. And so we talked with Dan Harborough, who's on back again today to listen in. I'm very pleased about that. We are going to work on getting a member of the staff at the State Department of Commerce to be part of our conversation. But this week we have invited an appraiser. Many of us have used the family firm, because I think this is the second or third generation that's owned the family firm. I've used them both residentially and commercially for my career endeavors. And I think most folks know Emily, and she will tell you about her background. For those of us who've used the firm, we see the credentials of the firm at the back of every appraisal. And she's calling in from Florida today. So I want to thank her for going the extra mile on behalf of County Council and the members affiliated with this committee. Emily Bradman, who is MAI and SRA, works both at a local level, statewide, and has worked nationally on appraisal issues. I want to welcome her to talk about some things she's done research on. I found out in my warm-up conversation with her this morning that she's actually done some focused study on why residential appraisals don't do everything we hope they would. And she can talk to us about some of the constraints. So she's going to have maybe a 10, 15-minute presentation on some research that she's done in the last couple of years, and then open it up to questions so that we can understand why the problems we all moan and groan about in residential sales take place. And that will help us formulate our questions and help us figure out where our final approach needs to be. We know already that it's not just local. We will have to approach the state and probably the feds, but the conversation and the research that she's had over the last couple of years should help enrich our conversation and help us be much more specific. Emily, I see your face, and everyone else should. Thank you for taking the time to join us.
Thank you very much, Cheryl, for inviting me. I am the president of Charles P. Bradman and Company, which was a firm started by my father back in the 1960s. And yes, he was a second generation appraiser. And I'm down in Miami actually with my father's sister, taking care of some family issues, and found out that her father, my grandfather, became an appraiser because the bank just set him down that path. He was a banker and he was making loans, and he sort of got slated into the appraisal department, and his 3 sons became appraisers, and so did I. So we've been doing this a long time. I actually started working for my dad back in 1987. So more than 30 years ago, pushing 35, and trained with him and worked with him until he passed away in 2001. And I've been there by myself ever since. So I have the MAI and SRA designations from the Appraisal Institute. The MAI designation is a commercial designation and the SRA is a residential designation. I also have the AIGRS designation, which is a commercial review designation. I'm state certified in Ohio. And my particular practice tends to be focused on eminent domain and property tax. I'm the property tax consultant for the Shaker Schools District. And I also do appraisals, property tax appraisals for individual taxpayers on what we call the other side. And I also do a lot of work for government agencies. So I've done a lot of work for the city of Cleveland, the Northeast Ohio Regional Sewer District, any big public project that's going on, I was probably involved. I did the appraisal reviews for the Opportunity Corridor and the RTA Euclid Corridor. I did appraisals on the Inner Belt. I could go on and on and on, but you could read that in my qualifications. And I apologize, my aunt's lovely yard is in the flight path of the Miami airport, so I apologize for the background noise. So Cheryl called me because I think I heard Dan Harbaugh recommended me. I happen to be this year the president of the Ohio chapter of the Appraisal Institute. And so I've been getting a number of calls from that role as well. But ironically, or fortuitously, I guess is the word, is I happened last year to do a study for the city of Cleveland, Department of Economic Development, Community Development actually, on why residential houses in the city of Cleveland don't appraise. And so that I think is the information that you're looking for.
Yes.
And in terms of a little bit of background about the appraisal business, commercial appraisers and residential appraisers are very different. It's almost like 2 different professions. It used to be that residential appraisers were, mostly men who were probably mostly worked out of their homes and appraised, back in the day, 10 houses per day, and had a really robust business. And it was a field with a lot of professionals. Those guys are gone. They feel the profession has been decimated. And the commercial profession is different. So you have levels of appraising. And I always say, like, level 1 is I'm buying this house for $100,000. Is it worth that? And that's your mortgage lending appraiser. Level number 2 is the residential appraiser who's more sophisticated. I'm being relocated or getting a divorce. What is my house worth? Level number 3 is your commercial mortgage lending appraiser. I'm buying an office building for $1 million. Is it worth that? And level 4 is your more esoteric commercial appraiser who does, partial takings and easement valuations and partial interest valuations and all of those things. So when you're looking at this level 1 appraiser, a licensed residential appraiser in the state of Ohio, when they do appraisals in the city of Cleveland or for mortgage lending anyway, they are bound by a million regulations. Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, federal housing regulations, and the FIREA and Dodd-Frank legislations in the mortgage crisis, both in the 2008 and previously, created these appraisal management companies. And appraisal management companies were created to be a firewall between the lender and the appraiser. And the idea was that lenders had appraisers that they trusted and they would go to over and over and over again to provide appraisal reports that they could count on. Obviously, in the mortgage crisis, there were bad apples and fraudulent, and dishonest appraisers and dishonest lenders. And so there was a perception that there was a problem with lenders going to crooked appraisers to get values that weren't sustainable. And in order to eliminate that fraudulent thing that did happen, of course, this legislation was enacted, and the unintended consequence was that this firewall was deliberately put between the lender and the appraiser. And the unintended consequence of the firewall is lenders could not go to appraisers that they trusted. They couldn't build a relationship with appraisers that they knew did good work. And so these appraisal management companies were formed, and many of the best appraisers actually left the business and formed the appraisal management companies. And these appraisal management companies get assignments from the lender. They randomly pick appraisers off a list and send them out to do these appraisals. And then the appraisers on this list are constrained by federal regulations. And so in doing this study for the city of Cleveland, I was charged with doing 6 residential appraisals, one each in 6 specific neighborhoods in the city of Cleveland. And I don't do mortgage lending appraisals. So I hired an appraiser and I watched him do his work. And I talked to him. I went with him to the houses. We talked to people. He explained to me what he did. And what I concluded, really, in a nutshell, is that these appraisers are in a little tiny box. They have no autonomy, no flexibility, no ability to use their judgment. It was really sort of unbelievable. And as I was telling Cheryl, at the same time, I was doing an appraisal in the city of Cleveland, and we were doing, one of the neighborhoods was Mount Pleasant, and he was appraising a house in Mount Pleasant, and I was appraising a house in Mount Pleasant for the city of Cleveland for a road project on the corner of MLK and Farringdon. And I was able to choose my comparables however I wanted. I was appraising a 2-family that had 2 driveways, and one was being closed off. So I had to value the property to determine the difference in value when they lost their second driveway. I could choose comparables from any neighborhood. I could go back in time. I could choose whatever comparable I felt with my professional judgment was appropriate. The appraiser that I hired had to bracket the size of the house. He had to have sales that were smaller and larger. He had to have sales that were within a very short period of time, maybe 3 months. He had to have sales, he had to bracket everything. He had to have one that was lower than his conclusion and one that was higher than his conclusion before adjustment and after adjustment. He said he had to bracket a porch. If the thing had a porch, he had to have a comp with a porch. I don't even know how you bracket a porch. And he had so little leeway in selecting these sales that it made his job very difficult. And then secondly, the way the federal regulations are, these appraisers, there's a federal database of sales. And so when you have a comparable sale, say that this particular house sold for $50,000, and you have to rate the condition. The appraiser rates the condition of that house, and there's very specific criteria for a condition rating. And once they give that condition rating, it goes into a federal database, and it's compared to how other appraisers have rated that same sale. And if you use it in the future, it has to be rated the same way. So you're not really, if I were doing an appraisal, I would compare the condition of the comparable to the condition of the subject and see if it's better or worse. But now that's a, average plus sale forever. And if you say it's average plus and other appraisers say it's average, you're going to get flagged and get in trouble from the bank. And you're not really looking at it in comparison to your subject. It's sort of frozen in time where it is. So that was a particular constraint that was very frustrating. And there's no access to that rating that the other appraisers have given to that sale. So that was one particular issue. Another issue in the Fairfax neighborhood we came up with was really fascinating, was there was no data. And we had chosen a house. We had chosen houses that were listed for sale. And in Fairfax, we found this house. I thought the Fairfax values were going to be great because it was so close to the clinic. Well, there were no sales. It seemed like most of the sales were fraudulent in the area and they were very hard to track down, and he couldn't confirm anything. He spent a lot of hours on it. And I said, well, why don't you just go to Huff? I mean, you're 4 blocks from the clinic. Just go to Huff and pick a comp from Huff. Well, he's not able to do that. And that's because of the federal regulations. He has to be in the neighborhood. And he can go out of the neighborhood, but he would have to do a market analysis of the other neighborhood, a market analysis of Fairfax, a market analysis of Huff, make a comparison, and put that supporting data in his appraisal. Now, he's getting $350 for this appraisal. So he's already spent time looking at the house with me. He spent 6 hours trying to track down these sales in Huff, calling people in Florida, trying to get them to verify transactions. And he said, sure, I can start again and go to Huff, but I have to do this market analysis. And that's just a federal regulation. So I was involved in the working group that the city of Cleveland is doing. And we interviewed, we had like a little round table of a number of residential appraisers, and there was some discord in the round table because some of the residential appraisers said, yes, you can go out of the area. And other ones said, no, you can't. And the answer is, yes, you can. Yes, you may, but no, you cannot, because you may go out of the area, but the amount of extra work that is required to go out of the area is not feasible given the fee. And so that was a big specific issue. So let me just look and see if there's what other major points and what recommendations we made in the end. As I said, I had a busy meeting this morning, so wasn't able to look at this prior to, but the issues, the unique challenges that we came up with were a lot of sales are not reported through the multiple listing service. So this was a big issue in Fairfax. Rehabbed properties didn't tend to transfer through the MLS. And so again, the appraiser couldn't verify the sales and he couldn't use them. You know, if he can't get a picture of the interior, if it's on the MLS, but there are no photos and no one will talk to him about the condition, he's not comfortable using those sales. Contact information for the buyer and seller on the deed or conveyance fee statement would solve that problem. You know, you have a conveyance fee statement that you file with the county, but it doesn't have any contact information on it. Email addresses being required on a conveyance fee statement would be super helpful. Multiple transactions of uncertain origin was a big issue. I have a little section of all this, you know, multiple flips of a house by all these LLCs that have registered agents, but we can't find them. You know, that is a huge problem for appraisers. And there are no building permits that are shown. You know, and apparently we looked at the conveyance fee statement, the Secretary of State's website, and the deed. And none of those places can you find out who actually these LLCs are. And so we just don't know. And so then those sales just had to be ignored. Well, before I get into this, the only other thing about this box that the appraisers are in is that the lenders all have different requirements. And the AMCs act as a sort of clearinghouse, and the AMCs, appraisal management companies, often require appraisers to include anything that any lender is asked for. So you have the federal requirements, but then lender A says, why didn't you mention Marcellus Shale? And they require a statement. This property is not affected by any Marcellus Shale formation. Well, now the AMC will require every appraiser to put that statement in every appraisal for every bank. And then bank B has another random requirement. And then that AMC, to avoid it coming up again, will require every appraiser to have this, to meet all of these extra random requirements. So then the other things we came up with in our study was difference in perception of amenities. And this might be getting more into unconscious bias and unconscious bias or actual bias, right? we appraised a house in Glenville, and my appraiser wasn't able to get the value that it was listed for. And before we turned in the study, it sold for the value it was listed for. And so that was great, right? Why couldn't he get the value? Well, his perception of amenities were different than perhaps the buyer was. Let's see. The appraiser dismissed a high sale in the neighborhood because it overlooks the cultural gardens and has a view amenity that the subject didn't have. Is that location really an amenity to a buyer in that market? That was the suburban appraiser's perception that that was a good location. It actually doesn't overlook the cultural gardens. It really overlooks St. Clair. It's kind of on a main street because it backs up on a Google map. It looks like it overlooks the cultural gardens. There was another sale that he thought overlooked the cultural gardens, but that house was next to a 4-family apartment building, was actually inferior to the subject, and he should have given it a plus, but he gave a minus. And so there are definitely issues like that. And I think we also thought that if you don't know what the buyer values, it's very hard to make positive and negative adjustments, right? So a bigger house may not be an amenity to someone, or it may, but I think appraisers consider their values and the markets that they know what's a benefit may or may not be a benefit in a different market. We talked to a lot of realtors who said they had willing buyers and sellers and had deals killed by appraisers. And we talked about, what else? Out-of-town investors. That's a whole topic. Cheryl and I talked about this for a long time this morning. The main thing that I learned in doing this study is that Cleveland is full of out-of-town investors. If you go to an how to invest in local real estate seminar in Florida, they will tell you to go to Cleveland, Ohio and buy a house. And the reason for this is because the values crashed and the rents stayed stable. And you can pick up a house for nothing and slap some paint on it and rent it out. And when we did our study, we found houses owned by an investor in London, an investor in California. We heard of investors in Israel, New York City. I mean, the number of dollars flowing out of the city of Cleveland into, foreign coffers or out of state, profit centers is just unbelievable to me. And that's a real significant issue. And then additionally, rehabs by absent landlords are lower quality than rehabs by local investors. In this case, the realtor said that the investor from London in the Lee Harvard neighborhood paid $36,000 for the house and made $13,000 worth of improvements. The realtor recommended an additional $10,000 and the guy didn't want to do it. But he sold it it was listed and appraised for $85,000. There are also issues. That particular realtor had an issue with his potential purchaser getting qualified for a loan and sent her off to some friend of his, which I thought was interesting because perhaps there could be something a little bit more equitable. And the realtor appraisal relationship, we found significant animosity between realtors and appraisers. The realtors did not have an understanding of the constraints that the appraisers were under. A realtor said an appraiser just auto-populated the appraisal form on a fully rehabbed house with whatever comparables came up, which is very unlikely, I would think. A lot of these appraisers really work very hard for fairly ever decreasing fees. But this particular realtor said that he had a buyer for a house and then the deal didn't go through because it didn't appraise. And then he had a second buyer at the same price point and a different appraiser in a different bank, and the house appraised just fine. But his experience soured his experience with appraisers. He in fact was very hostile when we first contacted him. He came right along though when he found out what we were doing. Quality of the housing stock and housing code enforcement. We found a big issue with FHA loans. Sorry. I apologize. We found a big deal with FHA loans. You know, houses won't qualify for an FHA loan unless they have meet specific condition requirements. So it's on the appraiser to kill those deals and to report those defects. I don't know why there aren't inspectors that do that, but the appraiser literally is a housing inspector if he's doing an FHA appraisal and has to say, this has peeling paint, this has this, these things have to be fixed. So those were the main issues that we encountered. I did tell Cheryl a story about an investor. I was appraising a house for the sewer district, and a guy from Tennessee had purchased, I was appraising a house at about 109th and St. Clair, and the owner had come from Tennessee and had purchased probably 25 single family houses and was renting them out. And he did very little to them, but he's the one who told me. And I said, you know, I'm inspecting the house to do an appraisal. And I sat and listened to him for about an hour as he told me how much money there is to be made in Cleveland. He said the streets are paved with platinum here because these houses are so cheap and that the rents have never declined. And it's so interesting, you know. I think some of those out-of-town investors find out that the taxes are a lot higher than they anticipated, and then they just abandon the properties. But the ones, this particular guy was living in Cleveland for the duration while he was amassing his empire. But those are the basic issues. I think the problem is that these residential appraisers are in a little tiny box, and they have no ability to use their judgment, and they have no ability to and they have a ton of fear. Like the bank is going to reject the report and make them start over and make them do it again, you know, add 5 hours of work to their $350 fee. So they're full of fear.
Emily, what are the core restrictions that a residential appraiser faces?
I think,
and who creates those restrictions?
It's Fannie Mae. I think it's Fannie Mae. It's the banks, but it's really federal regulations. You know, and I think maybe this, I mean, we could talked about this in the City of Cleveland working group. I mean, do you really want to try and change federal regulations, or do you want to just create some gap funding? We talked about educating appraisers, which I think is great. Educating appraisers on Cleveland neighborhoods, on specifics. I mean, there's definitely a lot of unconscious bias or maybe some perceived issues. I know it came up in one group meeting that crime in Glenville is lower than Ohio City. Appraisers probably aren't aware of that. So,
and
you know,
unless you had statistics, they didn't believe you.
And if you have statistics, they may not believe you, right?
Anyway, yeah. Frank, did you get a copy of this report that Emily did for Cleveland?
No, I just Googled to try to find it. I didn't see it anywhere.
Emily, can you send us a copy of it, please?
I probably would have to, I should probably ask if I have.
Okay, was Tracy Nichols who retained your services?
Mikhail, well, it was with Tanya Manise when she was there, but she.
Okay, so.
But.
It was submitted to the City of Cleveland?
Yeah, Mikhail Walkers.
So if it's submitted to the City of Cleveland and they have it in their possession, I would think they do. Ohio.
It's a public document, and we're entitled to obtain it. We just have to find out who has custody of it.
Yeah, Emily may not be the one who can do something about that.
Just on this point, if I could, Madam Chairman, Mikhail Wackers is the Community Development Director. I would ask your counterpart at the county, go peer-to-peer, talk that way. That might be the most today. That might be the most expedient way of getting it. If not, just do a public records request.
We need to do something besides public records requests. You know that even we need a courtesy from one development director to another. I agree with you.
I just gave you a path on how to do it, and if it doesn't work, you do a public records request.
I'm gonna go your first path, Matt. I was hoping
I could certainly ask their permission to give it to you. I'd be happy to do that if you would prefer to go that path first.
Okay. I'm sorry, Frank, did you have something you were about to say?
Well, I was going to ask Emily a question, but I could wait till we are at the point where we're ready for questions.
Actually, I think we're there.
Okay. Emily, going back to, it might have been Fairfax, you mentioned that they couldn't find any sales. And do you know what year that was? Was this many years ago or was it just recently?
They couldn't find any usable sales. It was not in the pandemic. It was late 2019. So there were all these sales. Like some houses sold 3 times. You know, we had some sales where a house would sell for 28, 48, 66, or 22, 37, 57. Like, and they just flipped between these different LLCs. But none of these were in the MLS. You know, a residential appraiser wants to use transactions that are in the multiple listing service for multiple reasons. One is because it was exposed to the open market. It makes it an arm's length sale. When it's not through the MLS, many sales not through the MLS could be legitimate, right? Like a buy owner sale, but many of them are not arm's length sales. He sold it to his cousin, or his one LLC was related to the other. So if it's in the MLS, the appraiser has already eliminated the fact that it was an arm's length. And then secondly, you have a description, you have a contact, the realtor, to verify the sale, and you have hopefully photos. And so especially in the city of Cleveland, where one house to the next could vary tremendously based on condition, those photos are very, very valuable. And so if you have a lot of transactions that aren't in the MLS, it's A, sort of suspicious, and B, just time consuming and difficult.
Has anybody done any research to determine what is the percentage or amount of non-MLS sales that would be suspicious versus just because people put a sign out front, or they listed it on some website, or has anybody done that? Because I have to say, I don't assume that every non-MLS sale is suspicious, but I certainly agree with what you said, that there are examples of ones when they transfer like that 3 times in a year. Right. But I'd be reluctant to say that you only want to look at MLS, because I think you're gonna miss a whole lot of sales in the inner city.
Well, and you might. And I know I sold a house in Shaker Heights in a hot market with a buy owner sign, for sure. And at that time, which was probably in 2000, a lot of houses in my neighborhood were selling by owner. But again, it's the lack of available data for buy owner sales. And I don't think I do drive a lot of appraisals in the city of Cleveland for the sewer district. And I recently appraised a whole lot of Cleveland schools for the school district. I mean, I'm in a lot of Cleveland neighborhoods, and I don't see very many buy owner signs. So I don't know that I've ever seen any. And so I don't know. I don't have the answer to that question though about the percentage.
Okay.
I just know it's a lot easier for the appraiser to use something in the MLS. And again, the appraiser's fee is really, really low.
What's the average appraisal fee?
$350 to $400. And so, you know, and I'll tell you, in our study, the appraiser I hired spent 6 to 8 hours per appraisal. And, you know, it's not just he's taking that money home. He has to pay for insurance and continuing education and, you know, expenses, obviously, but there are licensing expenses. So it's not like, you know, and his insurance and all of that. So, you know, it's not like you can take the fee and divide by the hours and that's his profit.
Couple of questions. This is Khalil. The first question has to do with sort of that continuing education, or sort of education for appraisers generally. An appraiser comes from Geauga County and appraises a house, you know, in Lakewood. We know how much location matters in these decisions, these value decisions. If they don't understand the area, how can we expect them to be accurate in their estimation of, you know, one neighborhood that may be very close to another neighborhood but there's a dividing line that that person doesn't understand and doesn't recognize in the minds of the people who live and buy houses there. How can we expect them to be accurate in their appraisals?
Well, there's a requirement that in the Uniform Standards of Professional Appraisal Practice that an appraiser be geographically competent. And so an appraiser should be competent in areas that they work, and they should do the research in order to make those determinations.
And how do they demonstrate that competence?
Good question. I feel like the appraiser that I worked with, who was very diligent, did regression analysis, and he did market studies, and he really did spend a lot of time understanding each market that he was in. But I think that's something when you get the random draw from the appraisal management company, it's certainly a risk that you're going to have someone who doesn't understand the neighborhood or thinks that they do and doesn't really. But I think that's part of the problem with the system. And I know we talked in Cleveland about training for appraisers, having classes where appraisers can sign up and learn about Cleveland neighborhoods. Interestingly, the realtors have misunderstood the fair housing laws, to interpreted them in some cases to think that they can't tell appraisers anything about a neighborhood. So a realtor told me, I can't say anything to him. I can't say there's a church down the street. I can't say, people like to live here. And I said, I think you can give factual data. And I did go back to check, and, realtors can provide information to appraisers, and should, really. I mean, if the realtor says, hey, values drop off on the other side of the railroad tracks, that's not illegal to say that. Go show me some sales data. But that's a big concern. There are a lot of realtors who think I can't say a word, to promote this neighborhood because I'll get in trouble.
I guess my second question has to do with sort of reliability of appraisals. Is there any systematic sort of reliability test that, I don't know, any individual banks do for appraisals that they receive? I mean, I imagine people are using comps multiple times for different properties. How they use them could be tested against other appraisals. Does anybody do that?
Well, the feds do that. That's what I was talking about. There's this database. This was one of my appraiser's big issues, was that as you rate these houses for condition, the government knows how everyone rates them, but they won't tell you. So, could that information be shared? Could there be a City of Cleveland registry of these houses? And as you use comparables, could that information be shared? So if I verified the sale and found out that they had put in a new kitchen, was there somewhere and it wasn't in the MLS, is there somewhere where the next appraiser could have that same information? Do they have to track down that realtor again, or that homeowner? How many calls do they have to field from the appraiser different appraisers trying to gather information about the condition of a property that they're using as a comp? So really, yes and no is the answer to your question. More information is always good for appraisers.
Thank you.
Other questions? Sally, you don't have any questions?
I'm actually really, really interested in reading what she's written about this more.
Okay.
Because I do have a lot of questions, but I don't want to tie up the group's attention. But I think, Emily, I'd like to reach out to you separately.
Oh, that's fine.
If that's okay.
Yes.
Thanks.
So back to the qualifications. When we're looking at residential appraisals, because our primary concern is single family homes and their values in the core city and the suburbs, what are the three things that someone who wants to become an appraiser has to do?
Oh, interesting. Okay, so I just, I'm trying to get my brother-in-law to be an appraiser. So I've recently researched this. So in order to become an appraiser, you have to take 82 hours of education, which I think is fair housing, appraisal principles, appraisal procedures, and an appraiser supervisor course, Once you've taken that 82 hours of education, you register with the state as an appraisal assistant. Then you have to find a mentor. And you work for that mentor, and you need 3,000 hours of experience over 18 months. And okay, there's your first problem. Your mentor is getting $350 per appraisal and doesn't have any time to train you, and there's no money to pay you. So as president of the Appraisal Institute, I've gotten a number of emails from people saying, I want to go into the appraisal profession and I can't find a mentor. Can you please find me someone who will train me? Well, a lot of appraisers say, well, then I'm training the competition. I don't have time to train. You also hear you can't find qualified trainees. I know one appraiser is involved heavily at Kent State University and has gotten a lot of finance majors. And it's, you know, my dad used to say, it's like the pipe fitters in North Carolina. It's a apprenticeship that is closely held. I was on an Appraisal Institute call today where we were talking about developing pathways into the profession through universities. You can't go to college and major in appraising. And we would like to. The University of Cincinnati, in fact, tried to develop an appraisal program, but getting the courses approved by the state was so difficult that they abandoned the path. So once you find this mentor, you have to spend 18 months working for your mentor and do another bunch of courses, a lot of courses. I can't remember. I think I told him $3,000 worth of courses, but I think I'm not sure how many hours it is, but you do a whole bunch of other coursework. And that was to be a certified general appraiser. There are other shorter paths. Licensed residential appraiser can appraise houses up to $1 million. And then there's a certified residential appraiser who can appraise anything, small income properties. Those paths are very, very similar. I think the coursework is different, but you still have to mentor under an appraiser. So it's a very unusual profession to get into, especially in terms of how you know, most professions are entered today, because a college degree is required. College degree is required to get that, to be licensed as an appraisal assistant. That's changed recently because a lot of the older guys did not have college degrees.
Was it a 4-year degree or a 2-year degree?
It's a 4-year degree.
Okay.
And that's required. And that's by the state, but I think it's definitely nationally, it's required. So there's the Appraisal Standards Board, the Appraisal Qualification Boards. These all came out of FIREA back in the 90s.
So one of the things we also know is that given how you need to be able to find a mentor and how difficult that is, we see fewer and fewer women and people of color involved in the appraisal industry.
Well, I would say nationally, the average age of an appraiser, I think, is 65. I've always said that, you know, for 25 years, I was the youngest person in the room. I'm no longer the youngest person in the room, but I'm definitely still the younger half. For many, many years, I was the only woman in the room. Now I think we're at about 20% women. Women are really becoming more represented. And people of color, less so. Their Appraisal Institute is working on this. They have a diversity committee. They have a women's initiative committee. We talked about them in our meeting today and got some pretty unsatisfactory answers, but they're working on it. They talked about going to HBCUs to recruit, but again, there are no academic pathways through traditional institutions into the appraisal business. You take your courses through a professional organization. So while you are required to do thousands of dollars and many, many, you know, hundreds of hours of education, it's all through either the Appraisal Institute or for-profit schools like Hondros or McKissick offer appraisal coursework. And so but diversity on the National Appraisal Institute's website agenda, diversity is big right now. I mean, but it's just such a hard profession to get into that it makes diversity more difficult. Although although I'll tell you on the call we had for this working group, they did manage to rustle up quite a few local appraisers of color, which was nice to see.
From across Ohio?
No, in Cleveland.
Okay.
Is there any communication with community colleges about expanding their offerings to include this?
No, and as I said, the University of Cincinnati tried, but was unable to get this. So like the Appraisal Institute has really high quality appraisal education in courses that have been developed and put on for years. And they tend to be like 40-hour courses that you go away somewhere for a week. And they're also online. But when the University of Cincinnati took those established courses and went to the state of Ohio and said, we want to offer this class, they were like, oh no, you can't offer that class. Like and I wasn't involved in that, but the whatever the state required from the University of Cincinnati was too much, and they abandoned the project because they couldn't get the state to approve the classes.
Okay. We're approaching our bewitching hour. Gary, did you have a question before I ask? Okay.
No, good scratching.
Okay. Thank you for taking an hour of your time to talk to us about this. I see that
Madam
we
Chair.
have, oh, is that Dale's voice I hear?
That is. Can I get in a quick question?
Of course.
My question is that regarding the appraisal training, it sounded to me like it's practically undoable. You know, you said 3,000 hours over 18 months. Well, that's full time. You know, because 2,000 hours in a year is about full time. Plus, you gotta take all those courses, and it sounds like when you're a trainee, you don't get paid very much, if anything, for your work as a trainee. So my question is, number one, how do you find the time? And number two, how do you front the money that it takes to do this before you become an appraiser?
That's a great question. So it's, and I probably misspoke. It's 3,000 hours over a minimum of 18 months. So you could do it part-time for several years. And you know, how do you front the money for any educational program, right? If you go to college, you have to front the money before you get the job. But you are very accurate in that this family member of mine that I'm trying to get into the appraisal profession, that's the barrier, right? Can he do it with his existing job? Can he foot the bill if he takes 18 months, you know, out of his career to change professions? You know, how do you get that done? And that is a problem.
And do you get paid anything for being a trainee?
If you were a commercial trainee, yes. Commercial appraisers need trainees, but you know, a commercial appraisal office needs 1 or 2 trainees at the most, and they'll pay them. It's the residential business where it's a lot harder to pay the trainee, because those guys are making, as I said, $300 or $400 per appraisal. And so there's not much profit there to share.
And I could also see where the upfront cost would be a huge barrier to persons of color.
Right. And because it's not a traditional educational path, it's not like you could get a student loan to take classes from the Appraisal Institute. And the Appraisal Institute does have scholarship programs. In Ohio, we have a scholarship for women. But again, it's like $1,000 or something for the year, and only one person gets it. I think there are scholarships through the Appraisal Institute, but yes, I mean, there's a huge barrier to entry to this profession for sure.
Okay, thanks very much for taking my question.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Madam Chair.
You're welcome. Okay. Any other questions for Emily? All right. Thank you, Emily, for attending and answering our questions. We'd like to reserve the right to ask you some more questions, and we'll work on getting a copy of your most recent work for our review. Let's talk for a moment now about what we want to look at next to help us meet our mission. I saw a hand somewhere. Sally?
I would like to bring everyone's attention to NCRC's letter to Key
Oh,
Bank,
yes, thank you.
which I did circulate. And also to the point of that, locally, we're not seeing much momentum on the challenge loan fund. And I think there needs to be a little pressure exerted to move that along.
So you sent the letter. I thought I saw the letter this morning.
I believe Ashley sent it to everyone in the group.
Yes. I just was so busy I did not get a chance to focus on it. But this is the letter that we received this morning. Can you all see that? Did I make it big enough?
Essentially, what the gist of it is that they're saying that Key Bank has not completed the CBA as promised. And as they go into renegotiating a new one, they really haven't been the most collaborative partner. And even the proposal suggests that they're actually going to decrease LMI lending, which is kind of unthinkable. So locally, we know that the Home Repair Resource Center has stalled out in their conversations to really get the challenge loan off the ground. So any leverage that this group could put out there would be very, very helpful at this point.
I did talk with Keisha within the last month, and I just need to focus on the specific things that she said to me and gave me in writing, so that I can talk with the county council president, and we can talk about whether we both or just I want to have a conversation with Key about the problems. And I think Chris Murray is watching today, so I will also talk with him about these concerns, because they literally overlap with the 13 things that we ask them to consider as we move forward with the relationship. Did anybody else get a chance to look at the exhibit that Sally shared with us?
Yes.
Is that you, Barb?
Yes, I did get a chance because it was shared early enough, and certainly it has been part of our discussion at GCRC. It's just exactly how can we be helpful in moving some of these things that we know are good for the community. How will we be helpful in moving it forward?
Okay.
But holding Key accountable is definitely number one on the agenda, on our agenda.
Okay. Would you like for the committee to make a statement?
I think it would be helpful. I would love it. I personally love it, and I'm sure GCRC will agree with me that it would be productive.
May I ask if Key has responded in any way?
I believe, I'm sorry, Barbara, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Sally. I'm good.
I was going to say, I believe that what they're trying to do is set up calls with all the different local markets. So supposedly that's in the works.
And what does that mean?
And CRC will facilitate conversations with its member areas. So for Northeast Ohio and say Buffalo area, we did have a call to discuss this already internally, but not with Key Bank staff. So that would be the next step.
Okay. And so we see the letter. What are the top points that you believe that they've erred on and that we need to underscore?
I think locally, we certainly want to push on the challenge loan as one of the 13 commitments that this group had consensus was, one of our top priorities because it's moving.
Right.
It's just not moving
Well,
quickly.
I suggested when they talked to us that they put some compensation with it for the organizations, well, specifically for HCRC, so the HRRC rather, so that they could do more. Because one of the reasons they haven't grown is their budget is tight, just like everybody else's. So they can't move outside of certain marketplaces without capacity, staff capacity. And Key Bank has a foundation. They could make some contributions, multi-year contributions to help underwrite that. And it could potentially be something that the county looks at. Uh, but it doesn't feel like they really want to put any skin in the game. So that's part of the dialogue that needs to be had.
There are many conversations that have taken place about potentially getting seed money for the loan loss reserve, staff capacity money. Keisha has laid all of this out for them, and they've been reluctant to move forward. And it's frustrating. And then I think what this letter is highlighting is the potential rollback of the LMI lending, the fact that they have not put forward the bank account that they had promised they would be promoting, the no fee bank account that would help the LMI community, and it hasn't happened. So, all of these things are alarming, but with our agreement, I think the challenge loan piece is critical, and perhaps somehow this could be leveraged into getting them off the fence to actually fund the loan loss reserve, and also agree to take less of a match on each loan, because if the fund would go a lot farther if they would agree to not have to have a 100% match on every loan, which everyone agrees is ridiculous considering the default rate is so low on these loans.
Madam Chair, this is Frank. Would you allow me for just 60 seconds to screen share something that would support what we're talking about?
Sure.
I'm just going to do it real quick here. Can people see that? Do you want me to make it a little bit bigger, or maybe?
A little bit bigger is always helpful.
Okay, there you go. So keep in mind that 3 lenders entered into a 4-year community benefits agreement, each of them separately, in which period they were expected to improve their lending. This chart just looks at home repair, just looks at the east side of Cleveland. Key Bank at one time was the leader amongst these 3. In fact, it was the leader amongst really all banks. And notice what happened in the same period when they're supposed to be improving, their home repair lending on the east side of Cleveland dramatically dropped. And I think, not that that's the biggest point to make, but it could be used to support this, the fact that these conversations with Key Bank have been ongoing for well over a year, and they just seem to be stalled. This could be used as leverage. This one chart might be used as leverage. I just wanted to show you that.
Okay, thank you. You did show this to us before,
I did.
And it is concerning.
Yeah.
That they have not consistently made any real effort. They literally, instead of staying where they should have been,
Right.
They lowered their standards, and we should find that acceptable.
Yeah. I'll go ahead and stop screen sharing.
Okay.
Thank you.
Oh, no, thank you. Okay, so the goal I will be accepting recommendations for the next meeting, but we also, looking at our 3 measures, maybe it's time to talk about what we say specifically to Key Bank about their lack of willingness to begin real negotiations to help increase the challenge loan program across our marketplace. Because that was clear when we went through the who votes for which item. That was the one that consistently, I think, made almost everyone's list. Okay. Anything else for the good of the order? Thank you all. It's 3:10 10 to 3:15. My goal is never to keep you for more than an hour unless we are working all hands on deck on something like what the subcommittee did. So I will work with staff to get you some recommendations in the next 2 weeks about what our next conversation will be about, and as well to get the report from the city. Thank you all. And if there is nothing else for the good of the order, I move adjournment. Could I have a second, please?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. And you'll receive communication from us in the next couple of weeks. Thanks, everyone, for this.